Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Mem Dalid Amud Beis. 10 lines from the top. Our Gemara is discussing Schitas Peiros on Shabbos, and it says that mutter lechatchila to squeeze plums, quinces, pears, things that you do not normally want their juice at all for. And it brought a statement then from the household of Menashe Bar Menachem that they used to squeeze pomegranates on Shabbos. The Gemara now goes back to that statement. Shabbat Menashe Bar Menachem Hoyu Soichtim Berimonim. The household of Menashe Bar Menachem would squeeze pomegranates during the week. Says the Gemara Rav Nachman, Halacha Kishel Beis Menashe Bar Menachem. The halacha is like the household of Menashe Bar Menachem. Ask the Gemara, Omar le Rav Nachman Menashe ben Menachem Tanahu. Is that a Tana? After all, he was just being used as a proof because they used to squeeze pomegranates during the week. But he's not an opinion to say that the halacha is like him. The chitem, if you'll say halacha ki haytana, the savar lo kishel Menashe ben Menachem. If you'll say the halacha is like the Tana that says it is usher to squeeze pomegranates on Shabbos, because he then uses Menashe bar Menachem as a support for himself, because they used to squeeze pomegranates during the week. Ask the Gemara, Umishum the Sover Menashe bar Menachem halacha kamoisu. Menashe ben Menachem have ruba da alma. Is the household of Menashe bar Menachem, the majority of the world, they're one household. We'll say the halacha is like them, meaning like the Tana, because they squeeze pomegranates during the week. Gemara says, in this nan, we have a precedent. It says in regards to kilayim, ha-mekayim koitzim bekerem, if a person is mekayim thorns in a vineyard, Rabbi Eliezer omer kidesh, v'chachamim eino mekadesh. Rabbi Eliezer says it is prohibited, whereas the chachamim say that is not mekudash, and therefore it's permissible to use that vineyard. Why? Says the chachamim, because ela davar shekamoy mekaymin, only those things that you want to then have kiyum, that you want to then continue to produce. Those are the things that the Torah prohibits for kilayim. But thorns, who wants thorns? What's the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says that it's kidesh, that it's prohibited? After all, there are only thorns together with these vineyards. Answers the Gemara to explain in the name of Rabbi Chanina, because sheken ba'aravia mekaymin koitze sodas ligamal lehen. Because in the Arabian area, they used to raise a lot of camels, and they would feed on the thorns. They would eat the thorns. And therefore it's considered to be something that's planted together that you want to then have a kiyum for. So therefore Rabbi Eliezer says this would then prohibit the mixture of these thorns with the vineyard. Ask the Gemara, Midi area, what kind of proof is this? Daravia Asra. Aravia, that's an Arabian area. That's a territory where a lot of people live. And therefore, it's valid because there is a good amount of people who then have camels who feed on the thorns. But over here, because one family, one household, Menashe bar Menachem, they squeeze pomegranates, that's going to then give it validity. Let's nullify their das in the face of everybody else. Rather that the reason is like Rav Chizda. The reason why, indeed, we can say that the Tana has a proof that you cannot squeeze pomegranates on Shabbos because the household of Menashe bar Menachem squeezed pomegranates during the week. The Omar Rav Chizda, because Rav Chizda said, Trodin shesochtan v'nosim b'mikvah poislin es ha'mikvah b'shinui mara. He says a person squeezes, beats into a mikvah, that will then cause a shinu of the mara, and that mashke that causes shinu mara in the mikvah is poisel the mikvah. V'holav b'nei schita. And he asked the Gemara, but this is not about schita. The fact that he squeezes beets are not something that makes a mashke. So how can the mashke, although it discolors the mikvah be poisel the mikvah. You have to have it as a mashke, and this is not a mashke. Explains the Gemara, Ella mai islach lemeimar. What is it you're going to say? You must say, Kivan de achshavinhu, havaluhu mashke. Since by squeezing the beets, he wanted to be a mashke, therefore he gives it chashivus as a mashke, and therefore it has the din halachically as a mashke, whereby the shinui mara is poisas hamikvah. Hochanami, so too over here in our case in regards to the pomegranates, Kivan de achshavinhu, havaluhu mashke. So too, if a person is going to squeeze pomegranates, in this case, the household of Menashe bar Menachem, they are going to then give that juice, chashivus, to be a mashke. In which case, it's also true when it comes to anything that a person would squeeze and want the juice. Only when it comes to plums and quinces and pears, a person doesn't want the juice. So therefore, it's not considered to be a problem to then squeeze those peiros, because you're not doing it for the juice, you're doing it just for the peiros itself. You don't want the juice at all, you want to discard the juice. But if you would want the juice, then you'll be machshiv the juice to be a mashke, and that would also be aser. Rav Papa argues on this whole idea and says that it's not the reason because he squeezes the beets and therefore it makes it into a mashke because of achshaveh, which poisels the mikvah with the shinui mara. Rav Papa says that's not the reason why the mikvah is posel. He says, you know why the mikvah is posel? Because this is something that you cannot make a mikvah with. And therefore, anything that you cannot normally make a mikvah with, if it makes a shinui mara in the mikvah, it will poisel the mikvah, not because of achshaveh, because it's a mashke. And therefore, according to Rav Papa, we wouldn't have an explanation of achshaveh for our case of pomegranates. He would not agree with the fact that a person then squeezes pomegranates. That's going to then give it chashivus as a mashke. Tanan Hasam, the Gemara now brings a Mishnah, Nafal lesoicha yayin, oy choymetz, oy moichal, v'shine marev posel. Here we're talking about that other items fall into a mikvah. Here we're talking about either wine or vinegar or moichal. Now moichal is the olive juice. Now when I say olive juice, there's different stages that they take the olives initially and they place it into a vat. And initially, when it's put into the vat, there's a clear type of liquid that comes from the olives. Once it sits together with all of the olives in the vat and it heats each other up, after several days, it gets another type of liquid, another type of moichal, of olive juice. And this one has a mixture, a little bit of, it has a little bit of a thickness. It's not just so clear water. And then afterwards, it's gathered together and it's squeezed and pressed to get out of all of the oil. And then after it's pressed, they are gathered together and they are placed in a place where ultimately there's another moichal, a third stage of moichal that comes down. This time it has a little bit of oil that comes with it. So the Mishnah says that these things, including the moichal, will change the color, whereby they will poisel the mikvah. Man tana the moichal mashkechu. The Gemara says, the Gemara understands over here that the reason why it's poisel the mikvah is because it's a mashke. Who is the one who holds that the moichal is considered to be a mashke? Omar Abaye, Rabbi Yaakov. It's Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya Rabbi Yaakov oimer moichal harehu kemashke. Rabbi Yaakov is of the opinion that moichal is considered to be a mashke, and therefore it's poisel the mikvah with its shinui mara. Umatam omru moichal hayotzim bitchila tohor. And what is the reason that they said moichal that comes out in the beginning? That means that first stage of the three stages I mentioned before is going to be tohor, when the olive juice of the moichal will come out when it's clear. That'll be tohor. Who holds that? What's the reason for that? Because he doesn't want, the owner doesn't want the kiyum, because it's just clear water, has no significance for the owner to keep. Rabbi Shimon oimer moichal eino kemashke. Rabbi Shimon argues and says moichal is not like a mashke. Umatam omru moichal hayotzimi ukol beis hama abad tame. What is the reason why they say that? moichal, that third stage moichal, that after it's gathered together, even after it was pressed and taking all of the oil out, they gather together and they let it sit, and the moichal then comes out. Everybody, he says, what's the reason why when that moichal comes out, it's tamei? It means that it's machshir tuma. Because there it has some remnants of oil, and therefore it's going to be machshir the tuma as part of a little bit of shemen. So it comes out that we have these two extremes. The first stage, moichal, is tahor. The last stage, moichal, is going to be tamei because it has some oil in it. Ask the Gemara, if that's the case, then what's the machlokes that says that moichal is tamei, and the other one says that moichal is a mashke, and the other says moichal is not a mashke? If they both agree that the first stage is tahor, the last stage is tamei, what is the machlokes? My beinai, what is the difference between them? Explains the Gemara, Ike beinayu da'osi basa itzatzto, that there is a difference between them, that which comes out in that middle stage. When it comes out in that middle stage, then that has some sort of mixed, call it a thickness of olive juice, which has maybe also some form of oil, enough to say that according to some it's considered to be a mashke, whereas the other one is not a mashke. So over here we have a machlokes in regards to if it's going to be poisel the mikveh as a mashke. Rava argues and says mishum that have a davar she'ein oisin heimenu mikveh poisel a mikveh b'shini mara. He says over here that because it's something that is not made with it to be done in a mikveh, therefore it's poisel the mikveh with a shinui mara. So Rava argues on what we said before, that it has to be a mashke in order to be poisel the mikveh. He says again, this is something that the reason why it's going to be poisel mikveh is because it's not considered to be something that you can use it as a mikveh. It's not something that can be used as a mikveh, and since it's a shinui mara, it will poisel the mikveh for that reason. Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Baita the Gemara says that Rav Yehuda says the name is Shmuel, Soichet Adam Eshkol Shel Anovim L'Toich HaKedera. If a person, he says, squeezes a cluster of grapes, he may do so into a pot of food, but not inside of a bowl. Rav Chisda said, Midivrei Rabbeinu nilmad. From here we can learn, a person could milk a goat, and the milk will go straight into a pot of food, but not into a bowl. Alma, so we see over here that the liquid that is being squeezed out, let's say in the case of the squeezing out of the grapes, that liquid is being squeezed out of the grapes. If it goes into a pot of food, then it's going to be considered to be oichel, because since when it leaves the grapes, granted it's liquid, but since it goes into oichel, it never would have a din of mefarik. It never had a din that you separated in one entity that made it from a different type of entity. Because over here, the liquid that you're squeezing out, in this case, the juice from the grapes, when it goes directly into a food, it's like you're then putting into another food. So halachically, it's considered to be that was squeezed out from grapes is not mashke, but rather it's oichel. It wasn't ever a din of a mefarik. However, if you would squeeze it out into a bowl, then that itself would be then taking a liquid, in this case the juice from the grapes, and by squeezing out of the grapes, it goes from the fruit, and then comes out and is extracted into the bowl, whereby it becomes its liquid. So then that's a malacha of mefarik on Shabbos. Masi Rami Bar Chama. Rabbi Chama asked the following question: Zov shechoyle v'sa'ez hacholav tamei. If a zov who is tamei, and when he holds on to the udders and is milking the goat, so then he's going to metame not just the udders that he touches, but he has the status of being metame also the liquid that he's coming to then metame, that he's coming to hold. So he's metame the milk that's coming out as well. And here we don't distinguish with what is he then squeezing it into. If it's a kedera, or if it's a kara, whether it's a pot of food or whether it's going to be into a bowl, we don't make that distinction. We say a person who's a zav and squeezes and milks the A's, then that milk will become tamei. So if you're going to say that it's, let's say, going to be squeezed into a pot of food, it's considered to be oichel. So we know that for oichel to be kabel tuma, it has to be muchshar. And therefore, when was it muchshar that it would then become tamei? Ask the Gemara, my is kasher. How is this liquid that has the status of now being oichel, because it is now inside of the pot of food? So how does that become tamei? It was never muchshar. Answers Gemara, because of the first tipa that was extracted when a woman who was herself, let's say, a nida, and there it's talking about when she then extracted milk, so she wanted to do so, it became an oichel, and therefore it says that the first tipa that comes out of her dad, she then smears it on the nipple. That itself then is going to be machshir all of the other milk that will come out. So even if that other milk has the status of oichel, it's now muchshar. Said the Gemara, hachanami betipa muluchleches al pi hadad. So too when it comes to the A's, when he's milking the A's, the first drop he then smears it on the nipple to then facilitate the nursing of the udder to then come out to bring out the milk, and thereby that will then be machshir all of the other liquid that will come out. So even though if that liquid is considered to be an oichel, because hamashke bola oichel is oichel if it goes into a kedera, nonetheless it will become tamei because it's muchshar ayedei, that first drop of milk. Masi Ravina asks, Tmei meishe sochat zeisim va'anovim. A tmei meis, tamei meis, who then squeezes zeisim va'anovim. On top of kuf mem hey amid aleph. Here, the tmei meis doesn't have the same status as a zav in that by pressuring by squeezing the dad, that itself will then metame the milk inside. The tmei meis will only metame through the mageh, through the touching. So over here, he'll be metame, of course, the zeisim, in this case, on the anavim, the grapes or the olives themselves. But in terms of the liquid inside, the tmei meis is not going to be metame them. And it says over here, kibeitza mechuvenes tahor. If it's just the size of a kibeitza, exactly the size of a kibeitza, this is the anav or the zayis, on top of kuf mem hey amid aleph, then that which he then squeezes, so when it comes out, so then that liquid will then not become tamei from the olive or the grape because they're less than a kibeitza. Since it was exactly kibeitza when he squeezed it, so now it's less than a kibeitza because it's less. It's the kibeitza less some drops of oil or juice. So therefore, that juice which then touches the fruit will not become tamei because you have to have at least a share of a kibeitza to metame. But if the olives and the grapes are greater than a kibeitza, then the juice or the oil that will then come out can yes become tamei ayidei, the touching of the oil of the grape or the olive, because it's more than a kibeitza and therefore it'll be metame. Ask the Gemara, but if it's going to be considered to be oichel that escaped from the olive or from the grape, so then where again is it machshir to become tamei? The amris mashke habala oichel oichel. Who, if you're going to say that liquid that came out as a result of squeezing has the status halachically as oichel, so what was machshir that oichel to then go ahead and be tamei? B'mai is kasher. How can that juice which has the halachic status as a oichel become tamei through the zayis and the anav that it was squeezed from? Answers the Gemara, Hu moisiv lavu mefarikla. He asked the question and he answered it. Over here we're not talking about he soichet inside of a pot of food, and therefore it doesn't have the status of oichel. Here he squeezed it into a bowl, and since he squeezed it into a bowl, then it has the status of mashke, and a mashke doesn't need huchshar in order to become tameh when the tameh mace touches the liquid.